Hey, Inner Circle members, this is Charles Lewis, and welcome to the Photoshop Speed Runs with Tom Morelli. Was that a growl or a motor? I'm not sure. And also, besides Tom, also joining us today, which I'll talk to Tom in just a second, is my son and business partner, Todd. Hi, Todd.
Hello, Dad, and hello, Tom. Hello, members. The reason I'm showing this image here is I just kind of wanted to show that what we're talking about today is a little bit of the behind the scenes of what ends up making beautiful portraits. And I love these images that Tom has shared with me of these old time photographs of babies and that old camera room there and stuff. And then this beautiful, recent photograph of a baby. So I thought that'd be a good place to start us off. But we're going to be going through live Photoshop demos today. So you're not going to see PowerPoint slides today. You're going to be seeing actual action being taken. So I'm really excited.
Yeah, and also joining us today, obviously, is Mr. Tom Morelli. Hi, Tom.
Hey, gentlemen, you said off to a running start. I didn't know running was involved today. I would have worn my sneakers, but
I hope you
great.
stretched.
I did, yes, yeah. This whole thing will be a stretch if my brain is taxed. But yes, I did my little bit of stretching, and I was at the mark, and you said go, so here I am.
Right on. Well, it's great to have you here, my friend. You're a terrific photographer, business person, and Photoshop artist. Just
Yeah.
Thank you.
fabulous what you do and how fast you do it. But before we get into the demos, I just want to make two quick points because I was thinking, what, in my opinion, are the two biggest things that we want to be sure to cover.
Dad, before you do that, if I can interrupt you, because I want them being able to do something too while you're giving these key points.
Okay.
So sorry to interrupt you there, but while my dad's giving these couple of key points, I want to open up the questions box to those of you who are on here live. You get to guide Tom and tell him what to do. Now, by that, I mean, maybe you have a particular challenge that you've had utilizing Photoshop and you're like, hey, what's the best way to remove stray hairs? What's the best way to, add a catch light to the eyes if the catch light just wasn't quite right? Or, whatever it is, type into the questions box and let us know what you'd like to see Tom do. And we're going to go right in order as those come in. And I know my dad has a couple that he's going to have for Tom. Tom might even have a couple that he can show if those suggestions aren't coming in right away. But we really want to hear from you to make sure we do the things that you'd most like to see Tom do during this live event.
Right on. Very good. Two major points. I'll never forget Donald Jack telling me ESP, and I'm sure most of you have heard me say this before, but we were driving to a wedding and I had packed his car and everything, and we're driving down the street, and he said, so you're going to be a photographer, huh? And I said, yeah, you bet. And he said, well, always remember ESP. And I said, oh yeah, ESP, extrasensory perception. I've heard about that. And he said, no. Expression sells photographs. And I've never forgotten it because he considered that to be the most important thing to remember about photography, is that the expression is what really sells the image. If the client doesn't like their expression or the expression of one of their children or whatever, that photograph is a reject and it's gone. So when we talk about expression sells photographs, what goes right along with that is that people want to look good. In the portrait and wedding photography business, people want to look better than they really look, but not artificial. So there's this spot where you have to have this line drawn in the sand, and you won't go over that line. If you go any further, it's going to start to change the way the person actually looks. What Tom and I are both looking for is to have people look at their photograph and say, wow, that looks just like me on a really good day. I had a really good day that day because I look pretty nice in that, if I do say so myself. So that's what we're looking for. Don't go too far. And then the other thing that I feel is so important is the word natural. In portrait and wedding photography, except in rare exceptions, they want to look natural. They want to look like they were not posed, but they look really good because they were posed, but that doesn't really look artificial or fake posing, or, or something they would not normally do. So those are the two main things that we're always looking for in the photography business and portraiture and wedding photography, is that they want to look natural, but very good. And they want to look like you caught them on a good day and you didn't just retouch this thing out of the park until it doesn't look even at all remotely like them. So with those two key points, we will introduce our specialist, our guest expert today, Mr. Thomas Morelli, on Photoshop techniques. So Tom,
Thanks.
take her away.
Thanks, Chuck. And I know we're taking submissions to people, so I'll let you from people. So I'll let you cue me in. A couple things I wanted to say in conjunction with what you were just talking about, Chuck. It is true. When Photoshop came along, the tendency was to go, wow, this is really cool. I can get rid of all the bags under the eyes and all the other things that people don't like. But when it was overdone, my motto became, if people can tell it was Photoshopped, it's probably over Photoshopped. Kind of like cooking. Yep. How much spice do you use? Oh, too much. So yep. I prefer under. And what you're going to see today, for the most part, is there are thousands of functions within Photoshop and Lightroom and other programs similar. I use very few. I really am looking to make the skin look good if there are blemishes, get rid of stray hairs. If there's something in the background I wasn't careful about, a stick or something, to get rid of that, of course. Really the basics. I tend to be pretty right on with my color correction, my exposure, so I don't do a lot of that in Photoshop, but it's nice to be able to go, this could probably be just a little tweaked to make it perfect for a print because we're calibrated to your lab. That's another thing. When you do Photoshop, if you're not used to using a printer yet, you can output to them, and generally for no charge, they will make you test prints, at least to get your screen calibrated and get your Photoshop skills up a little bit, so you can go, okay, what I'm seeing on my screen is pleasing and what I'm getting back from the printer is pleasing. So you want to keep that in mind as well. So as we go through, I've done some really, I do copy and restorations once in a great while. I can do some pretty amazing things, or Photoshop can do some amazing things, and I use that. But generally, I'm looking to not spend a ton of time on the computer at all, let alone Photoshop. So proper lighting, clothing, posing, all the other things that we do to get it in the camera, just like we did, if you're around this long, for film days, we're trying to do within our digital exposure, so that we're not spending an inordinate amount of time. But obviously, we want to give it that polished look and tweak things a little bit, so that you have that next step beyond what somebody might be able to do currently with their own camera or cell phone.
Yeah, I think you really made a really good point right there that we don't say nearly enough, and that is get it in the camera. Yeah. Take the time. Okay, you're photographing a 2-year-old. Okay, yeah, you'll get it as perfect, if there ever is such a thing with a 2-year-old. You'll get it as perfect as you possibly can, composed, cropped, all those things, lighting, of course. But yeah, the person is 2 years old and moving around and active, and so. But you want always, no matter who you're photographing, to get it in camera. You do not want to say, we'll save it for post-production, or we'll save it for Photoshop. No, yeah. If you can get it humanly possibly, get it in the camera. So that's a really good point, Tom. Thanks.
And probably the most common thing I see people trying to correct is color and exposure. And really, if you get proper technique down, you should spend very little time having to do that, whether it's in your camera room with your lighting or in the field. Yeah, there are variations. The sun goes in and out, color temperatures change outside and so forth, but generally you can get pretty darn close to good skin tones, because again, I'm talking skin tones. I'm a portrait photographer here. So I'm not talking landscapes, commercial photography, things such as that. I'm talking about babies, families, high school seniors, where we want skin tones to be pleasing and accurate as they can be, and that comes from proper technique. So I often will move someone's hair last thing I'll say, Todd, and then we'll move on here. When I'm photographing someone, especially a high school senior or a family, I'll fix the hair, I'll fix the little pendant. I photographed someone this morning that had a pendant on it, #1. She'd won this award. She wanted this 1 to show on her pendant. And I made sure it was centered properly. Because, yeah, could I go in later in Photoshop and move it? Of course, but why? Why not take 30 seconds, and they notice. She goes, "You are so meticulous." And I'm like, "Yep." And I'm thinking to myself, I just saved myself 5 minutes in Photoshop, and that does add up. So with
Sure
that, I'll
does.
hand it off to Todd.
All right. Great points. And that's a great play. Actually, you set up a nice first thing for us to do if you're set up to do this. Now, you mentioned about skin tones and color correction and stuff like that. Now, I also know that you're pretty darn good about getting good exposure, good white balance, good everything in camera. So you might not have an example already open where you wanted to tweak the skin tones a bit. But if you do have something where you could maybe start with that, because right now we don't have any suggestions in from members yet. We do have a couple comments that I want to read first. But I would love it if you are able to do an example of how quickly and easily and how you go about fixing skin tones.
Yeah, and you're kind of right in that I am so right on that I don't have a lot of really off color, but I have one little guy here that I have an example for, so we can
Okay.
talk about that a little bit, and then how
Okay.
how I go through that process.
Great. If you want to get ready for that while you're doing that, just getting that image up and ready. First of all, Shirley typed in and said, I still don't know how to use Photoshop, but I do want to know the basics and the finesse of what Tom does to make his works of art. I'm using a different program to do my edits.
Sure.
So yeah, the techniques will be the same. It's just the tools that you might use or the interface might be a little bit different. So you'll get a lot from today, Shirley. And then Andreas typed in and asked, do you record your webinars? Andreas, yes, we do. If all goes as hoped, this will be hopefully up on the vault within the next day or two, the recording of today's webinar. Okay, with that, Tom, are you ready for me to switch presenter over to you and share your screen?
Yeah, let's switch over and we'll hoe into a couple examples here.
Okay, great.
All right. So you see this family of 5 young men.
We sure do.
Okay, good. And I've got to move my screen a little so I can see my layers. This is a family that always invests 5 figures every few years. It's a pediatric dentist and her husband, and they came in, and unfortunately, this little guy couldn't make it that day. Okay, so, and I'll tell you how this comes into color correction. I had to photograph him on a different day in his mom's lap. So the colors obviously don't match at first, and it was a bright, beautiful day. They really loved the warmer skin tone, so I kind of left them that way. And your screen is going to vary. And as a side note, this is one reason I don't like offering digital images to clients, because it can look great on your screen, but when they go to their phone, their tablet, or their screen, it might be off because everybody's calibrated differently. So what you see or may not see may or may not be pleasing to you, but that's not really the point of this. So what I had to do, let's see if I can do this, is as I was looking at this little guy 2 weeks later, imagining where he was going to be, I had to kind of match that. So because for the sake of time and also bandwidth, I did not import raw files here, but you can, believe it or not, if you're familiar, and surely I'll address this in a moment, you can go in to Camera Raw Filter and still correct even JPEGs in Camera Raw Filter. I'm not sure if you knew that or not, but it still brings up the same tools. So there are color correction in here and also other tools that we could talk about, but I will go in here often, and sometimes it's a slight tweak of bring it to look, and I go with what you see is what you get. So there's no numbers here on this one. Some of the other ones we use numbers actually for like white, making sure we have white balance. It's a different subject we might get into. But I will go in and you can use Camera Raw. However, what I'm going to do here is, let's go back to this young fella. Hold on one second. This is on the fly. Can you tell, you guys? I'm going to keep it simple. I use this a lot. It's just color balance, and I will simply go in and eyeball. And again, this is maybe not the most accurate, but you can see what it's doing. So I will go in and play a little bit until I think I see, hang on a second, Morelli's challenges. until I get something that I feel like is more matching what I see on the one I'm plugging this into. And we'll get more if you folks want to see a little bit more about how I actually got to the point. All right, it's going to be close. So at this point, I won't bother to do this for the moment, but I would cut him out. Now, I don't do a lot of cutting and pasting out of things like this. This is pretty unusual, but they were investing a lot of money and they bought these outfits to match. So I would cut and paste him out so I'm going to do just a rudimentary, we won't bother, just to show you the process I use. And what you'll find too, if you're proficient at all with Photoshop, is that there are about 92 different ways to do things. So I'd bring him in, and again, this isn't sized right, but this just to show you the process I went through. Now you can see he's not quite there. So see the whites are off and so forth. So it's a little pinker in this rendition. So I normally would just go in and eyeball this thing. And again, there are different tools to do this with. And his exposure is a little off. So I would go into exposure and tweak him up a little bit. And we're getting a little closer. You can change in this as well. There's all these auto features. I don't tend to use the auto features, just like with the auto exposure in a camera. So I eyeball, and that's somewhat close to what I had there, just by some simple color corrections. Then I would end up, cleaning up the edges and so forth, and I end up taking them out. So these ended up as a bunch of 24-30s and a 30-40, or other family groups did. Probably the largest sale I had last year, but it was all because I was able to do this. Now I want to just show you real quickly when it comes to cut and paste. They had me change, I don't know, every head, every person in there, and because I'm able to do that. Now I don't offer that unless they ask, but if it's a difference between someone investing in a wall size and saying, boy, I'd love this, but if only little Timmy was perfect, I'll say, we found one of little Timmy in another exposure. It's sitting in the same way. Let's move that over for you. And I don't charge for that because we charge an adequate amount enough. So I'm going to stop there on color correction. As far as what we're looking for is, if you need a starting base, let me bring up a different. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think we're going to have some follow-up questions here potentially. So this was good. No, go back to that image if you would, please.
All right.
So a couple of other things on what you were doing here. First of all, so if anyone has any questions on what Tom just covered, including the swapping of the heads, because he covered a couple of things here we were not planning on, and you might be wondering, we get asked that a lot, and we really, like Tom said, don't do this very often. But in this case, you ended up having to do that quite a bit. If you've got any further questions about that, type them into the questions box right now before we move on to the next image. Now, Linda had a question here on this image, and she says, why did you use CMYK rather than RGB for the color balance?
That might have just been, I'm not sure what I was looking at there. Normally, I would use RGB. Where was the C? Was that on CMYK on this one? Are we looking at the raw? She was looking at the raw probably, because I don't know. Normally I would not, unless it was a raw file, I would not go in and. Is that what we're doing here? That's what we're looking at probably.
Okay, so normally you do use RGB.
Yes, yeah. And so if that was either an error on my part, or it might have been because I'm using a JPEG file, and I just wanted to show people. I was surprised a couple of years ago when someone said you can go in Camera Raw and still work on files, because sometimes there are certain things I want to do that Camera Raw does some neat things with texture, clarity, things like that, especially if I'm doing a copy and restoration, which I don't do a ton of, but it will bring up details that maybe are better served by that. So there's a lot of things you can play with in that Camera Raw. Get rid of that. But yeah, sorry for the confusion if that was, but normally it's RGB.
Okay, that's great. That answers the question. That's fine. Thank you. Okay, good. So anyone else have any questions on this one? Otherwise, we're going to move on from here. Now is your chance. There are no stupid questions. Please get those questions into us. Plus, if there's anything you want to see Tom do in Photoshop specifically, let us know in the questions box and he'll be happy to do it. Otherwise, Dad, you'll be able, I know you had a couple things you wanted to see him do as well. Right now, we don't have any questions. Oh, here we go. Linda asks, what is your method for adding the shadow under the baby on the lap?
That was a very good question because you can see it come and go there. I will.
Will you, Tom, just for a second, will you remove the second baby?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Remove the second baby. Now, slowly zoom back in on that baby and remove the shadow. Okay, so there, that's what it looked. No, just take it out. Leave it out a second. Okay, that's what it looked like before. And you can see how immediately it does not feel like that baby's really there.
Right.
Now go ahead and put it back in. So yeah, look at that. Look at the difference that makes.
And I will say, you have to be careful. You have to look at where the shadow side is so that if the direction of the lighting is coming that way, the same way when we photographed that day, the direction of, I used you can see the catch lights there. I had a key light, a softbox on a stand, plus ambient light bouncing around.
Now
and,
let's stay here a second. So you can see as you zoom in, there are some issues still.
Yes.
So is this the finished image? And if so, I assume, you know, in whatever size they get, you don't notice like those little things at the top of his head there and stuff.
Yeah,
like
no, this was my working file. That's why it's in so many layers. I
okay.
didn't want, I don't have the finished file is not in this particular folder because I thought in case we anticipated somebody wanted to see face swaps,
Yep.
we'd be talking about that. But yeah, I definitely would go in and clean up. Matter of fact, if you get rid of these, I would go in and clean up all the stuff around the edges.
Yep.
So that it match. This is just
okay. I wanted to be clear about that because people being that zoomed in might wonder, oh wow, that's really what you gave the client? Okay.
Yeah, no, the same thing with this. All these faces are where we started, but it was what I saved kind of in anticipation of this particular presentation of showing how we brought them in. The cleanup process is a little time consuming, so I didn't bother to prep for that so much as far as generally.
Can you show us just for a moment, Tom, zoom in on that baby and just give us an example of one part of the cleanup, just in case.
So there's a couple ways to do it. What I do is I will create a layer mask, which we've done over here.
Mm-hmm.
And that will allow me to go in and paint out certain areas. Now, there are other ways to do this. There are masking techniques. There's, the magic wand tool I use sometimes, quick selection tools, things like that. But I prefer, especially on something like this, to go in and do it by hand, just because these are going to be wall sized. So they, anything like this along the ear. So I'm just painting it. I'm just using a dark paintbrush. Now, if you mess up, you can turn around and bring that stuff back. Yep. So it's non-destructive. Whereas I've seen some people actually go and take, the erase tool and they'll erase something. But once you do that,
after a certain number of moves, it no longer can be undone.
Yeah, and you want to see the child's eyes. That's always a good thing, I found. So. Right. But going in just to kind of do a little paint. Now, there are background removals where I photograph in the studio with a gray background, and that's easy to use the magic wand and take out. And I have an example of that later if you want to see it, but it's easier to take out stuff. But in this case, what I'm generally trying to do, and I set this, you can set your hardness so that, but that can give a real cut and pasted look. So I generally go with a softer. And again, there are a million ways to do this. This is just the way I learned. I've been using Photoshop since like 2002. So I found that this worked for me. It takes me about 10 minutes to do this kind of.
There you go. Okay, that's great. That's all I wanted to see was just an example of doing that because I don't want to take you away from, I know you got a lot of other things you want to be sure to do today, but that helps. Now, are there any further questions that anyone has on this image? Otherwise, it looks like Andreas asks.
Twins.
Linda. Oh, I don't think we answered Linda's question. What's your method for adding the shadow?
Oh, there's several ways, but one way that I use occasionally, and I'm going to use my little twin there for a second. Let me get rid of is you can, as you know, find him right there. It's not cut up very well, but you can,
Yeah, I think you double click on the layer if you're trying to open
yeah,
up drop shadow.
I'll go up this way. You can do a drop shadow, and as you can see, and this is probably an easier, more accurate method. It's not good because he's not totally cut out properly, but you can add a drop shadow. Be careful with it where it goes, which direction it's in. I chose to go in and I just burned in using the, let's see here, this tool here, our little burn tool. I went in and softened it up and enlarged it, went in behind his little head and went along and just burned in behind him on this boy's shirt.
Right.
It's on another layer so that it didn't, the basic layer we leave alone. So I just brought in another layer and then I could adjust.
Right. Well, and the other reason, the other benefit to doing it the way Tom did it is if you do the drop shadow behind him, the drop shadow is going to be uniform on a flat space because it's not taking into consideration that baby exists in 3 dimensions. So the shadow is going to look the exact same distance and spread away from that baby's body, no matter where it is. If you look there, if you notice down at the bottom, if you can scroll down just a little bit, Tom, show the legs. You can see that the legs look like there's a little bit deeper shadow and a little further away than at the top of his head, because that's how it would look naturally. So the way that Tom did it gives you that flexibility to make it look more like a real shadow and not one that's just uniform all the way around the body because it's treating it just like a 2-dimensional shape.
Again, in the finished portrait, I would have gone in and cleaned up all this stuff down here, including if I want softening, blending that shadow a little bit. It's kind of hard there, but I really wanted to get you the idea that if you're going to cut and paste or add something on top of something else, which is rare, but again, once, twice a year, you might get something like that where, like, if it saves the investment from going from an 8x10 to a 20 by 24 by 30, just know that behind, light will cause a shadow behind that subject, and you have to kind of take that in mind to keep it real.
Right. Okay, very good. And Andreas has a question. Do you use the pen feature at times? And is there a way to use feathering?
I don't use the pen feature that much because I don't do that much cut and paste. That's probably more for commercial application where you're cutting out and putting onto a different background. So I'm more of either a magic wand guy, right here, depending on a magic wand tool, or just cutting out by hand. I know it's kind of ham-handed and it's maybe 2008, but that's the way I learned, and I'm pretty fast at it. So learn what you need to learn to get the job done. But I also always go back to, why am I doing this? Why do I have to cut and paste this? Could I have done something to preclude this? Because a lot of that will erase the need for these things. But yeah, that's one thing that's on my wish list for next year. Learn the pen tool.
Okay, well, this was a good example because even though you used this just as an example for my first question, which you weren't prepared for necessarily anyway, and you did a great job, is for the color correction of the skin tones, you showed us a whole bunch of other things that we would have never gotten to probably had we not, although I think you were going to talk about a couple other things in this image potentially today, which you already did. So you got some face removal stuff in there. You put a whole new baby in there. You put a drop shadow behind the baby. You corrected the skin tones. It is a powerful tool when you need it, and you can see how when you get good at doing this, it does not take you long at all in order to be able to do those things.
Well, and the good thing too is, if you have a lot of clients, they might come back, they might have more babies, you just never know.
And this way, they don't even have to come in and have a new photograph taken. You just replicate the same baby.
That's right, and you can put the baby in behind. Anyway, I'm just kidding around here,
All
but
right.
get the point.
Babies everywhere. Boy, if it were only that mothers around the world are thinking, if only it were that easy to add.
I see there's 4 or 5 baby plans right there.
That's right. All right. No other questions have come in so far from our members, and no requests for anything that they specifically want to see. So, Dad, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah. The main thing is her expression and her face. So that's my guess that's probably where Tom starts as well. So I would zoom in, and if you could show us like catch lights in the eyes and a stray hair here and there.
Yep.
Well, let me ask you this. Would you do anything with her eyes? Because they look not bad.
Yeah, not a lot. The reason I put these side by side was a couple different reasons. Occasionally, if we're not careful, and this was late in the day when I like to photograph, a little hot spot can come through and hit the
Yep.
hair. So I go and take care of that. I like to clean up the ground if I can, just because the eye goes to that. And I generally, I'll go through that in a second if you want. But your question with the eyes, I might, and these are, this is not the finished product. I kind of use this more as an example of you doing those things, but I usually would increase the catch light in the eyes. And again, I'm kind of there's a million ways to do things. You can go in with a dodge tool and just find out, well, the catch light's kind of over there. This is open sky. We could fill that in, but this is kind of where the direction, my off-camera flash kind of flat there, but I brought it in for kind of different examples. But that's one way to do it, to increase that. Now we're getting that starry-eyed look. So again, forgive me, but I'm doing this real fast. You could go in, sample the eye color there, take a brush, set it on darken. Let's go down and just kind of go in and darken up that side of the eye to get rid of some of that. So you just kind of got more of a catch light thing going on there. That's a little more directional. Not a huge difference, but it is a difference in terms of if we go back to the original.
Yeah, there is a difference.
You know, so those are, that and hot spots are two of the biggies. The grass is kind of brown in some of these areas, so I go in with a brush and sample the the surrounding grass color somewhere in there. And then I will just take, again, I use the brush on darken on and soft and just kind of go in and get, oh, whoops, wrong, excuse me. On color, I'll try first, and I'll just go in and kind of see what I get for that. If that doesn't work, I can go in with the darken brush, but I had it set on 100%. I like to work at smaller percentages and just see what it does, see if it can do what I'm looking to do. There are other ways to do this. I don't want to get too far afield here, but sometimes I'll take the patch tool and I'll just sample another area of grass that looks good and drag it down. And again, I might have to clean this up a little. I'm doing this fast, but I guess my point being is we're trying to make it so the eye goes to the face. And again, she's got kind of a bright yellow outfit on here, but it's a little bit distracting, but they loved it. That's what they wanted on this particular pose. But cleaning up those areas was kind of my point of this slide, was just to show that you can help images that normally, if they did it with their own camera, if they did it with their own phone, they wouldn't bother to do that. Vignetting helps, a little bit of vignetting as well. So, and I cleaned up the little hair there. There's just all those little points. Literally 5 minutes probably on this to do this whole thing.
You want to show, just in case someone's watching this, you want to just show how you took out that hot spot on the hair there?
You bet. First of all, always working in layers. So I'll just work on this so that you have one underneath to compare it to, and you're not, your history only goes so far. You can set the history, but to go back quite a ways. But instead of bothering with that, I just use 2 layers. That way also, sometimes you'll overdo something, you can blend it a little. So I still use the good old fashioned clone tool to go in if there's an applicable area to work with. And we'll just clone out some of that stuff.
Yeah.
And get rid of those stray hairs. That's 30 seconds. Now, to deal with this and this, there's kind of 2 different ways, and I'll do them both. By the way, this way I see I can toggle back and forth. Oh, that looks good. That works. That didn't work. So if I'm happy with that, a lot of times I will flatten it at that point and then make another layer. Again, everyone works slightly different. I want to make sure the color of the hair is the same. The 2 methods that I generally use are, I'll sample that and then just go up in here and clone that. And I might back it off a little so that there's a little bit of hot spot there, but that can toggle back and forth. And the same thing here. I will go in and maybe do a little bit of that. Doesn't take much. And again, we're enlarged quite a bit here, but in a regular size print. Because you don't mind leaving some sparkle in the hair.
Right.
However, I will go back and show you the other way. Sometimes I will use the patch tool. And this depends on the proximity to the edge of the subject. It lets you kind of pre-see what it's going to be. Sometimes I'll do 2 or 3 of those. I'll say, that look pretty good, Alex. That looks okay. And I'll take a sip of coffee, and then I might back that off a little. I'll say, well, it kind of does that, So there's your methods are going to, self-appear. Sometimes you'll say, I've seen this situation many times before, and I think that's the best way to approach it. So, again, they're 2 different ways up the same mountain. You can decide which works best for you. It all depends on the magnification. Last thing I'll say is sometimes I've gone in and sampled the darker part of the hair and set the brush on darken. Careful not to go over to the grass, and just, I don't know if that's dark enough. That's the sample color of the hair right there. We'll go a little darker. And maybe something like that darkens it up just a little bit. So there's different ways to approach this, but hair and expression. And Chuck, you mentioned something really important earlier. I will actually tell my clients as I'm photographing them, I'll say, the 2 biggest things are your hair and your expression, and they, especially senior girls, and they're like, man, you are right. I had one taken, my hair looked awful, or I looked like I had a fake smile. So I work on making sure that's the hair looks good. That's really important, and most of that's done in camera. But occasionally I'll get something like this. They may not even notice this. I just go in and clone stuff like this. Again, I'll do it real quick here, but just enough, and I'll clean it up maybe a little bit so that I don't like stuff like this hanging around. So I'll take the patch tool or the clone and just, again, that's not quite perfect, but just clean it up a little bit so that it separates you, that you took the time to do that. And a lot of times they don't even ask, but you just want to take it to that next step.
That's right. And always be really picky in camera, so that hopefully you don't even need to do that. But the important part about that is that what you already said, which was so crucial, they see how picky you are.
Right.
And that's so important because you're selling yourself here, and you want them to see. It's like, I'll never forget, I photographed this wedding, it must have been 35 years ago now, and we were cutting the cake. And, everybody's watching, they say, we're going to cut the cake now. And so everything stops and everybody's watching, and we're ready, and I'm setting them up to do this. And I just moved over and I just fixed her hair and her veil. I mean, it didn't take 10 seconds to just touch up her hair a little bit with my hand, and then her veil just so it was smoother. And I got a call on Monday morning saying, I saw you at so-and-so's wedding, and we were so impressed on how careful you were and meticulous, and our daughter's getting married and we'd like to talk, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
People notice this stuff.
Well, when you're in the I hate to put it this way, but the heat of battle, especially at a wedding, you're paid to make it look easy. So the wind was blowing. This girl's hair was kind of flying around. It was windy in that location. So I would say, oh, hold on one second. My camera's on a tripod so I can walk over. And I just, I want to make sure this is perfect. I know if who's I turned to him because my daughter's a sage now. I'm like, if this is my daughter, I know she wants her hair to look really good. So we're going to make sure this is right, no matter how many times I have to go over. They love that. And it's true. I mean, we're not making something up. They see me doing it.
That's right.
And, it's one of those, not to get too heady, but it's one of those things, handle everything with love. You love your client. And I mean this in the way that, the Greek has 6 different methods or words for love. And one is, caring for people. You want them to have the best you can do. And one is that their hair looks good and that you're taking care of them. So they notice that for sure. And they tell their friends, my God, he stopped. He didn't take the exposure. He took like 5 times. He kept going over to the hair. It kept blowing around. I felt bad, but he got it. Yep. That lasts a long time, even more than, I really like the photograph too, is the time that you took. So that's a great point, Chuck.
Yeah, it is so important because you're selling yourself. And that is beautiful. Could you zoom in just a little close? Okay. No, this is it. This will do fine.
Okay.
So talk about how far you go without going too far give us your years of experience with doing this for a living to be thrilling your clients on the first try.
Well, obviously high school senior boys, uh, believe it or not, and I photograph a lot of high school senior boys, want to look good too. They may
You
not
bet.
admit it. A lot of times they'll come in, oh man, my mom's make me do that, and I talk to them on that level. I'm like, how much did your mom pay you to come in for do this? So usually I'm with them, but they lie, oh
Yep.
man, she told me I'll get a new car. We just have a good time.
Yep.
What I have found in every case almost is when we're done, the mothers often will contact me and say, I can't believe it. My son didn't want to have this done. And he just said, I can't wait till we get to see these. Okay.
Yep. Right on.
Bang, you've done your job. And that's if you do it with passion and enthusiasm and you look great. Oh, that was fantastic. And we've talked about these things before. What this has to do with Photoshop, again, is that expressions and all that other stuff will come from that kind of feeling. So in this
That's
case,
right.
one of the most common questions we get is, forgive me for using this word, but they still use this. I mean, do you guys retouch zits? So
Yep.
I'm like, we sure do, And so again, there are many different ways to do this. I want to show you one quick example because, of course, Photoshop now has been introducing things like neural filters. And if you don't have Photoshop, it's only what, $20 a month. I get Photoshop, Lightroom, instead of $25 a month. If you're in business, that's not a lot of money. I used to pay $600 for the CD when it came out, and then a couple $100 for the upgrades. So
Yep.
you could turn it off at any time. So if you suddenly, for whatever reason, say, I don't need Photoshop anymore, there's no long-term commitment. It's just like cable TV, $20 a month or whatever it is. So, but within these neural filters, they have different kind of AI approaches to things. And one is called skin smoothing. I'm not recommending this, but I kind of wanted to show you a lot of AI products. You can go in and you can change, and it does, if we increase the strength here. So you can see it, but to me, that's mushy,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to kind of show folks though that, to go from there to there, you could keep doing this. You can apply that filter several times, and finally the blemishes are all gone, but they just look mushy. Now there are a lot of retouching applications out there, but kind of in the same way when I first got my first calculator back in, I hate to say when, my math teacher said, but I still want you to know why 2 + 2 = 4. It's, so
Right
so that you know what good is, because if you just hit an application and it retouches it, you're like, well, I guess that's good. So what we're trying to do is retain character. Now, I did a business portrait this morning of a lady I've photographed for several years, and she said, one of the things I like best about your portraits, she goes, you retouch them, you make me look great, but you don't take out all the lines. Now, this young man doesn't have the same thing she was talking about. We call them experience lines, the little laugh wrinkles around the eyes. But she said, that's my character. People said they wouldn't know me without those. And I've seen other portraits done where they just totally erase that. So we're looking to retain the character of this person. I take what's probably the slowest, but I'm fast at it, approach to this. And I use this two different tools, the spot healing brush tool, which I just go along, I sip coffee, and you just click and pull. And again, this is more of an extreme example. I'm not sure if it's better medicines, better diets, or better makeup, but I have less students, even the boys, that have blemish problems than I have had ever. The last 5 years where they've seen cleaned up. But what'd that take me? 20 seconds?
Yep.
All right, and then we go in and if you have larger areas, I will sometimes take the patch tool, and I will circle an area and find a clean spot and drop and drag so that there's not as much clicking. This can sometimes get a little blurry. It sometimes cannot work as well, but I will go through, and if it's near the edge like hair, it will pick up on that. It doesn't work as well.
Yep.
I used the clone tool for many years. You can still use the clone stamp. There's, again, several ways to do this. If you're an experienced Photoshop user, you might be out there going, yeah, but my method, and I'm going to show you one more method that's a little more advanced than this that I've been using for about 10 years, but just wanted to get a few more examples here. So sometimes I will take that and then we will back it off a little bit so we can kind of see what we've done. And if it's too much, you can blend it using your opacity blend and say, well, that's getting closer there. And get rid of this little guy here. So you can see, you continue doing that, and it literally would take me less than 5 minutes to clean this up to the point where his skin looks good. Now, sometimes we have to go in, if this gentleman doesn't have this too much, but if there's a little redness, you can go in and color correct just that area, or some people use a paintbrush with a opposing color to paint it so that it tones down the redness. Some people will just circle that area and change the color correction on that layer, or have a separate layer for color correction and change just that color. But he doesn't have a ton of it, but you can see just basically in a fairly quick time, we're able to go in and do that. Now, one of the things I want to show you, and this is kind of an extreme example, we're going to get rid of that. And the gentleman that earlier asked about if this is being recorded, this one is not one I expect you to remember real quickly, but I do it in my sleep, so it's pretty easy to do. This is, sometimes I'll just have a lot of blemishes, but I know this method will work well, so I will take, using the history brush, which I only use the history brush normally on this, is I will, there's our history. Oops, let's go get our history. So we have that up front here. Let's see here. Actually, you know what I have to do? I'm going to close that, and then we'll reopen him. There he is. So using a history brush, I will take this particular image, which is not going to be touched, get into my Gaussian blur, which is at about, in this case, it's a smaller file, so maybe we'll use that in that area. So it's kind of blurry, but not too blurry. Perfect, right? We're all done. They'll never notice. No. And so then I will take a snapshot of that, which is that little camera down there, and we're in the history palette, and then go back up and click on open and click on snapshot. So it looks like nothing's been done. Then, and again, this is being recorded, so you can't remember this, I will go to the history brush and go on darken to start, and a small brush, and I will just go over some of the blemishes. Enlarge that a little bit. And I'm really quick at this. And sometimes this is a lifesaver. If I've retouched the blemishes, but I still want the skin to look a little smoother, I'll go in, and this just gives a little polish. So I love this method, and it's really quick. Darken and then lighten. And I'll go in and I'll do this. And I haven't got this set really high because I wanted to, you can still kind of see, but you can see what it does. Now, a lot of times what's wrong with some of these methods where they just smooth the skin is you lose the pores and you lose the detail in the skin. And what this method does, with one more step here, and I won't get rid of them all because I didn't set it quite right, is then I go back up, click on that top guy, click on lighten, and go over the whole face. Let me see if I can get this up here. And it will clear up the skin. I didn't get rid of all the blemishes, but you can kind of see it will bring back pores, and it will bring back the shine on the skin, things that are necessary to create texture. But that method, a lot of times after I've done 90% of my retouching, I will use that as my polish, and it really makes the skin look pretty. So it's basically using that history brush and the lighten and darken aspects of it to get rid of. Now, this again is not a finished dramatic version of what that is, but if you look back kind of where we started to just using that, it starts to take care of some of those. And I didn't clean this up a lot, but if you can learn how to do that, it takes literally 5 minutes to do a face like that after you've retouched it, just to give it that extra little nice look without making it look mushy. So that's a sort of a little technique, and I've used that for years now. In this case, you know, I'd go in and I have done all this stuff first to get rid of that. And in his case, just to give you a last example, I'd go in and clean up some of his hair. I'd burn in some of the edges. There are different ways to do, not that you asked, but while we're here, different ways to do vignettes. The camera raw filter, even on a JPEG, will, let's see here, will allow you to do vignetting. And so that will give you a nice vignette. Let me move that over a little. So you can go into camera raw and, you know, vignette to your heart's content. The thing I like about that is it's even, and it doesn't rely on your hand, because I used to go in with a burn tool and just burn the edges. Sometimes I just want to burn specific areas. So instead of using this, I will burn with the edges. Let me get out of this guy here. Let's see. Let's cancel that. So I'll take this burn tool and I'll just go in and there, vignette, voila. And I just love vignetting. You notice how it brings the attention back to him. So in this, I don't use curves a lot, although you can, but for me, levels is what I normally use. So normally with this guy, 5 minutes, I would go in, take care of his blemishes, gray hairs, vignette a little bit. The color is the same as it came out of the camera, which is not bad. If you're not sure sometimes, I'll give you one other tip, and then Todd, I'll hand it off to you if you want to have other questions or other ideas. The color sampler tool here. If you go on an area that you know is truly white or black, and we'll use the black area right now, and click on that, it'll bring up these little numbers. And these numbers are helpful in color correcting something, because this black looks black to the eye. It would make a nice print, but you can go into levels, and in this case, you try to get the numbers to all be roughly the same. Let me go the other way. Let's see here. Oh, we want to go. Oh, sorry about that. You go into each channel and you try to get the numbers to match. Let's go into the red channel. There we go. And the blue channel, green channel. This isn't perfect. I'm doing this on the fly. But the idea is that theoretically, once those numbers are all the same, that black is truly a black. It doesn't have any of that contamination in there. So if I've done something like that and it changes the exposure slightly, I can bring that back up a little bit. That supposedly is color corrected. The other method of doing that also is you take that color tool and you go into a truly white area, and that gives you the white numbers, which are right out here. Now 244, if you're familiar with Photoshop at all, is pure white. So this is saying there's no reds, it's all white, but the blue channel is a little bit low. So you could technically go into levels, go into the blue channel, and bring up that number to get closer to 244. And so allegedly that now, it's pretty minimal. That was pretty close anyway. So now you have true black and true white, meaning the rest of the color should fall in place. Again, that's a real quick, but if you try to color correct something, that's a nice place to start. If you can find something that you know is totally black or totally white and use that color sampler tool, that'll tell you where you're at in terms of, is that pure black, is that pure white, or is it contaminated by something that you go in and correct? Todd, I'll stop there if you need me.
All right. We have one question from Glenn who asks, why don't you use frequency separation?
That is a whole subject on itself. And that is, I've been studying frequency separation. It's a great method. I just have never had to use it because of the fact that I am so calibrated to what I do. But yeah, if you can learn frequency separation, it is very good in certain cases for blending, smoothing, retouching skin particularly. I just never happened to use it because of the fact that I'm so attuned to what I'm doing and I'm so fast at it. So again, that's one of those palettes when someone says, I want to learn Photoshop, there's a million different ways to do things, and frequency separation is one of them. So maybe that could be a separate issue for a separate time, but I'm not qualified at this point to go in and
Okay.
I've taken a couple of courses on it, but go ahead.
Okay, no, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's all I had to say on that.
Okay.
I sound like Forrest Gump, and that's all I'm saying about that.
So the key is, it's, again, doing what you get most comfortable with. And a lot of times when you start with stuff in these kind of programs that, and then these things come up that didn't exist when you first started doing Photoshop and things like that. I don't know how long frequency separation's been around in Photoshop.
A little while, yeah.
A while. But, if you started with Photoshop version 1 and you got used to a way of doing things, and you can do it just about as fast with the old way of doing it as with the new way, then sometimes it behooves you just not to bother learning a new way. But other times there can be, ooh, learning this new way on this one thing that I do with almost every image, that will behoove me to take the 15, 20, 30 minutes just to tweak that system and start utilizing that going forward from now on.
Yeah, and YouTube and all those other valuable, there's lots of courses on many subjects, and I take a lot of them. Frequency separation is another one, which may or may not simplifies, but I don't have that many occasions where I literally have stray hair, make sure the background looks like right. This case I'm bringing up here is a severe example of some business portraits I did for a large company, and this guy's shirt just wasn't fitting him. It wasn't cooperating, and so frequency separation might have helped this one. But I just generally went in and in layers using clone and patch tool, blended in that shirt so that because I know they would have called and said, geez, the shirt looks kind of messy. As much as I tried to pull it and tug it, it was just a weird material. It didn't want to go. One other thing I'll tell you with guys too is get over here. Let's see. Whoops. Little box in the way there. Is this area right here is very common with men with ties. As much as we try to choke them and straighten those ties up, for some reason that tie area. Now, I don't have a lot of high school seniors that wear ties anymore. That's not a good example, but that guy right there. So that's, again, usually a clone tool will take 30 seconds and fix that up, but it can make a big difference in the appearance of that. So try your best in person to preclude that. But when you get that, I find that that's a quick fix, but it's a small fix, and they normally don't notice it or ask for it. When you project this type of image on the wall, they're looking at their face. They're more worried about their image, and they're not worried so much about that. But in this case, they were concerned about the shirt because everybody else's looked pretty decent. A lot of people had jackets and things. He didn't bring a jacket, so that left this out in the open, unfortunately.
Cool.
Any more questions, Todd?
No other questions at the moment. Again, if anyone's got something they'd like to see Tom do specifically, type it into the questions box. If you got any follow-up questions, these have been great questions so far. Type them in now, and I'll turn it back over to you, Dad, if you've got something else you'd like to see Tom do, or Tom, if you have something specific that you're like, well, this is something I get asked about a lot. Let's show this.
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, well, yeah, I photograph a lot of high school seniors this time of year in my photography camera room because it's cold out, it's wet out, it's sleeting, and just really not a good time. But they're my models, my class, in this case, 24 models or representatives. But I'm trying a lot of times to spice up my backgrounds or give them something different that tells their story. So in this case, this young man's dad actually was friends with Bob Marley, the artist who's passed away, unfortunately, a few years ago. And so this guitar, and his dad passed away recently. His dad handed him down this guitar. It has all the colors of Jamaica. And so he really wanted to sort of integrate that into his photographs. So I photographed the guitar, and then I photographed him just on my plain old master's background. But sometimes this can really dress up a photograph. So I have a lot of textures, brick walls, things like that. And let me see if I can find his guitar here, just to give you a quick, there's another example. Let's see here. This is a pretty easy method. And the thing about this is you don't have to be that precise with this method. Let me just bring up, so there's his guitar. So often what I will do is I'll just select that thing and copy it. And then we can close that. And I know it's a different image, but this is the one I saved to do this with. Let me get rid of this guy here. And I'll move this over here. All right, so with this particular image, I will literally just paste that. Now, the images are sized differently. For purposes of bandwidth, I made this a little smaller. So I will go in and simply scale down that guitar because I want to turn it into a background. And this is just the transform tool, obviously. So kind of fit that in. And, you know, I might play with, well, where does the whole of the guitar go? You know, but in this case, we'll just leave it at that. So we're going to, again, work in layers here. And so we can kind of see that's with and without. So normally I will play with some of these blending modes. And sometimes it's overlay, sometimes it's screen, sometimes it's multiply, sometimes it's just normal. And we'll bring the opacity down a little bit to kind of say, well, does that work? Does that work? And I literally will go in, and again, this is real ham-handed, imprecise. I'll just start painting out. Let's get that opacity up here using my paintbrush and I'll just go at first and do a rough draft, so to speak, and kind of see where he's at. And again, there's a lot of different ways to do this, but I'm just showing how I do it in about 5 minutes, because some of these, knowing what the client wants, I like to do this pre-projection so that when they come back, they see this rather than say, oh, imagine what it would look like if that guitar was behind you. So there we've kind of roughed it out. And then I will change the paintbrush and just start painting it back in so that we have guitar. And see, I messed up his hair, but it doesn't really matter because I can go back and fix that.
But just so nobody gets discouraged here,
Yes.
how long have you been doing this? Did you say 2000 what?
About a half an hour. No, actually,
No, I mean in your life.
I know, I'm just kidding. I have Photoshop version 1, whatever that is, whatever the first one is, or 2, whatever that one is. And so there was nothing like, you couldn't do things like this back then.
Yeah.
So again, I will usually play with this scale a little bit and decide where I want. So I will say this is a bit antithetical to our philosophy, which is get it in the camera and spend as much time as you can working with your clients and as little time as you can goofing around in Photoshop. But once in a while, I will offer a product that is almost guaranteed a wall sale, and that is if we can incorporate something they know and love into the photograph. In this case, knowing that it was his dad's guitar and the colors mean a lot to him. And so there's a lot of history there, and I'm doing this kind of fast, so I would clean this up a lot more. But you kind of get the idea that, and this is more, let's see here. Get rid of that guy for a minute. So this is more what I'm looking for. You know, it takes a few minutes to do that from this to this, but what a difference. And as he was one of my models or ambassadors last year for class of 23, and I got a lot of calls on this because a lot of times boys, again, we can't forget them. Everybody likes to photograph the pretty girls and stuff. But I'll tell you, the parents of the boys really will invest heavily if you do something that the boys really like and the feel tells the story, whether it's sports or music or something. So trying to incorporate that in there really makes a big difference in rather than just a school photo, pardon the expression. You don't want somebody to go, well, it looks like something you could have taken at school on a plain background. This is more custom made. So I do, my high school seniors, I do a fair amount of this. I don't do this ever, I don't think, on families or babies because they already have a background that, you know, fits that subject matter. But with high school seniors, especially during the winter where we don't get to go outside, this offers some variety, especially for my models.
Yep.
Nice.
Very nice.
Couple quick things. Shirley typed in and said, wow, love the guitar photos.
Thank you. He was a heck of a nice young man and a lot of fun to work with. His name is Jafari Matto, and he's a really nice kid. Very smart, friend of my daughter's, honor roll student along with my daughter in the drama club. He's just a cool kid and a good friend to my daughter.
Nice.
That's cool.
And then Shirley also asks, for the business photo, would you normally fix or remove the guy's lens from his glasses on his right eye?
All right, you get straight A's. Who asked that? Because I was going to bring that up.
That is also Shirley.
Oh, Shirley, you're good. Yes, normally, and maybe we can try a quick attempt at that. We notice how, and Chuck talks, and I learned from Chuck Lewis. You probably all heard of him. Look around, there he is, sitting right there. About Hollywood glasses. That was his
Yeah.
term, which is you borrow the frame without lenses in it from your optometrist so that you can be photographed without worrying about distortion and glare. Distortion is actually a bigger problem than glare is, because glare sometimes, you know, and if you have to, you can tip the glasses, you can do a little Photoshop. But this is kind of a pain.
Yep.
But here's what I would do, Shirley, is, and you may know how to do this already, Shirley, although you don't have Photoshop. When it comes to this, I'm kind of a clone stamp guy. Let's see if I can goof this up really quickly. I will just sample that area and just start going in. And oops, she's lagging a little bit there. Must be a moose on the telephone line outside. We are in Brewer. And what we're trying to do is retain this, because the shadows under there, I probably won't do it terrifically, but I will go in between the patch tool and the clone stamp and just try to find that balance between shadows and light, so it's realistic, because the glass rims are over the skin. So if you don't do it right, it's going to be kind of flat looking.
Yep.
But let's see here. So even that was like 30 seconds. So normally it's a little darker back there, so I might go in. I might even go in. This is, again, some people that are more experienced might be out there going, what is he doing? But I've actually done a little burn here or something. The only thing about the burn tool, if you ever notice, is it changes the color of what's underneath. And you actually can change that, protect tones, but still it can mess up your the look of what you're doing. So you have to be careful. But I will sometimes just go in. So even that, and I mean, again, I would work on it a little longer than that. If the client got that in a print, they probably wouldn't notice a whole lot, but it looks a whole lot better if you look at this and this. I mean, it just makes a huge difference. So if you can get them to take the lenses out, that's the best. And most optometrists in my area are willing to do that, especially if they say, hey, I'm going to Morelli. Oh, I know him. I did his glasses. They're willing to help out. But if not, because I mean, you don't need them for long. You're like, yeah, can we steal those for a couple hours? Sure. We'll tell everybody where we got them. And it makes a big difference.
Okay. Now, Glenn brought up an interesting point going back to frequency separation. And I think this is one of the things you wanted to talk a little bit about, Tom, as we get ready to do your whatever next example we want to do. And Dad, maybe you can think of something. We don't have any members that are asking for anything specific right now, which means we're answering all their main burning questions. But so Glenn says, for listeners, frequency separation allows us to work on differences in tone and differences in color separately. There are many free actions that automate the separation.
Yes.
So Tom, I know you wanted to talk a bit about that, about free actions and automating some of these processes. Now, you may not know about the free actions specifically for frequency separation, but just overall, what would you say about some of the free actions and automation of these processes?
Again, because most of them are pretty simple, the only automation I really use, and Glenn, I hear you. And a matter of fact, I was just looking, I was like, do I actually have that? I just upgraded my Photoshop upgrades once in a while, and I'm like, I don't think I have that in here. I have a lot of actions over the years. People want snow backgrounds or textures and different things, different presets and things. My lab, if I'm going to do a gallery wrap, they have an action so that it sizes up properly. So I don't do a lot of that because they don't require it that much. Really, the only action that I use, if I'm doing previews for people, I will have a little save action where I will get something ready to project, and I'll just hit save, and it saves it to the folder that's going to go into the be projected. So, it's still not a great answer to that question, but again, frequency separation is definitely something worth looking into. I just haven't had it be something as necessary, because if I'm right on my camera, generally I don't have to fix a lot of that stuff. I just want to show this. This was an example of slightly overdoing it, just a little bit. Sometimes, especially if you're not careful, you get a little highlight on the nose or on certain areas that can distort the nose. I went in purposely and smudged it a little bit to show that's not really quite the way to take it out of there, but it's a little over retouched. See how smushy he is? So you want to have a balance between those two, was going to be my point on this particular slide. Let's see here. Let me see if there was another example I wanted to show you here. Let's see. Sometimes you ever in life run up against a brick wall? That'll do it to you.
Many times.
Yes. And again, this is a, let's see if we can find the one with layers that I want. All right, so this is an example of, I photograph a lot of students against my gray background. It's white, but I don't light it, so it's a gray background. So they're easy to go in and cut out for the background. I'm pretty simple. Most of what I do is not cut out stuff, doesn't require a ton of automation or Photoshop stuff, but once in a while, some mom will give me an idea and say, my son's a wrestler, he's a hockey player, he's tough as bricks and things like that. So I'll find something, and some of these I've taken, some of these I've bought, but there's all kinds of stuff you can do yourself, and I will just cut him out. And the way I end up doing that is, using our magic wand that goes in and you just hit cut and it will take things out. And again, if you're more experienced, sounds like Glenn's more experienced, this stuff might be kindergarten stuff, but boy, I've reached a lot of people that are like, I tried, I don't know, how do you cut that guy out? So I'm trying to reach today on things that are stuff you're going to use every day.
Yep.
And in my order, the things you're going to use every day are gray hairs, blemishes, slight color correction, things that are still going to let you retain a realistic portrait. They're a realistic portrait. There are, especially with AI now, so many amazing backgrounds and images. People incorporate people into things like, fairy scenes or, amazing, just, well, the space shuttle, and just scenes that are amazing outer space. But my clients are, babies, families, and seniors. So I really have very little requests. I could probably use, Photoshop Elements or something other than there's a few things I do it doesn't have. And matter of fact, surely that might be a place for you to start. It's pretty inexpensive, and it has a lot of the tools that I use are in Photoshop Elements. If someone really is poor, there's one called GIMP, but GIMP is an online free open source Photoshop Lite type of program. But if you're in business, it's just, again, 20, 25 bucks a month. It's not a lot of money. So you can try it out and see if it's working for you. But if the closer you get to doing your technique so that you're going, that doesn't really need a lot of Photoshop, the better off that you are. Let's see here. I brought up this baby, but I brought up the one that was already retouched. That's what Todd looks like when he gets up in the morning and says, hey, it's a new day.
How did you know that?
So often on babies, and I thought I had the original file, I don't have it, they'll have minor blemishes. I do a lot of baby photography in the baby plan, and 3 months old particularly can have a lot of blemishes still. They have that younger, or even newborns. I'll use the same thing. Unfortunately, I don't have it to work on. She doesn't have any blemishes. I got rid of them all, but we'll just pretend. We'll say like this one is. And so again, I use at frequency separation might work obviously well for this too, but I literally take 1 minute, go in, do a little blending with my patch tool. I might go in with my spot healing brush tool here and just go in and do the little blemishes. There are some real extreme examples. If you photograph newborns, they can have rosacea or other really, really difficult skin problems where there's a lot of redness and things. Those take a little bit more time. And I don't have any examples of that because I don't run into that a lot, but I've seen people struggle with newborns. Those are going to take you maybe half hour or 40 minutes to get the skin to look right because you're trying to retain texture, color, realism, but also get rid of all those blemishes. There are some products that are sold that are newborn blemish remover products, and basically they kind of do what I'm doing by hand, but they're just a little more automated. But if you don't photograph a lot of newborns with a lot of that problem, yeah, I wouldn't worry about it. But people often remark, I love my baby's portraits are realistic, but they're very smooth and soft. And one of the ways we do that is through the earlier method where I use the history brush and just go in and smooth out their skin and make it look terrific. So do most of what we're talking about in camera. Once in a while, there'll be stuff on the backgrounds. You got to watch out with a white background. If you got a spot on your sensor in your camera or a dust spot that will show up, you've got to go in and remove those. And sometimes, I don't know if you've ever done this, anybody out there, but sometimes I've chased a spot for a long time and realized it was actually on my on my screen,
That's
like
funny.
yeah, I'm like trying to get rid of this thing and it's a little dot in the background, 2 or 3 swipes, and I'm like, wait a second. Then I wipe the screen off and I'm like, never mind.
Yep.
All right. Andreas says, and this is, I think, referring to the previous image or one of the previous images, says, beautiful work, but yes, too much on the nose.
Yes.
And Glenn says, Photoshop and Lightroom 2023 have masking tools that use AI to separate people from backgrounds, even
Yes.
select their eyes, their hair, etc. They do a great job. For groups, the mask, they mask each person separately. So yeah, there can be beneficial things there. Again, these are use them if you need them kind of tools, in our humble opinion, because you want to get as much in camera as possible, because it just will always look the most natural that way. But as these tools continue to improve, it's going to be better and better for separating people. And to separate people from background, you're not going to necessarily always going to be doing that to take them out of the image or to put a different background in between them. You might just want to separate them so that you're only color correcting that section and so forth. So those tools are good to know about when you're doing quick fixes as well.
Yeah, and one of the things that I do use from time to time is get rid of this guy, that is pretty accurate and kind of falls under that heading, is if I photograph a family group and the sky is not that exciting looking, the sky is not that pretty, or the clouds aren't white and puffy as I sometimes, then I will go for a sky replacement. Whoops. So we have to find, wait a second, we have to go back. This one's a little slower. But what we're doing, I'm just pretending this gentleman is outside to see a portrait. The sky is kind of gray and dingy. And so I go into select, find sky. Now this will find the sky pretty easily because it's going to be the empty area, I believe. I've done it on this kind of thing before. And I'll see if it selected that. Let's see here. And then we'll find out if this works. This might not work on this one because I'm using it in studio, but sky replacement should fall in behind him.
Yeah, and this is running a little slower for Tom because he's also broadcasting onto the webinar and sharing his screen, so it does affect his performance a bit.
Yeah. So yeah, my it's having performance anxiety. It kind of, yeah, it doesn't really. What I'm doing with this isn't really applicable because it's yeah, it's not on a cutout. Yeah, this wouldn't work. But anyway, if you run into, that's the procedure is if you have a group and the sky in the background, the sky's not really doing what you want, that sky selection can really help, because it does quite an accurate job of picking, even in tree branches and objects in the background. It will pick a family group and isolate the family group and put in a new sky behind them, and you get to pick the sky. If you haven't done this before, the sky is let's just go back to that for a second. The sky, there's about 12 different skies, plus also I've designed my own skies. But this, within this feature, there's a bunch of different skies that, and if you're just doing a landscape, I don't do a lot of those, and particularly not for business, but if you're doing a landscape or sunset or something, but you want to tweak it up a little bit, there's a whole bunch of different skies that are gorgeous, that can really tweak or add to a sky very nicely. So again, I'm talking once or twice a year. And if you said I don't have this tool available, I'd be like, well, no biggie. I don't use it that much anyway. So there's just a few things in here that I use that aren't on the standard. But again, as you're photographing, I always like to think proactively. Is there anything in this photograph that I could get rid of or do? Whether it's lighting, exposure, color balance, background. One thing I will say that I do like is it's fairly popular. Let's see if we can find one. I don't know if it'll work with this image, but let's try it out anyway. Is under the neural filters, I do find myself using on occasion the depth of field, which is depth blur. This emulates the look of a really wide aperture lens, like 1.8 or 1.2 or 1.4 lens, and a lot of high school students, particularly right now, and some family groups, are really in tune. This is actually done. I don't know if this is processing in the cloud. This is AI, so it reaches back up into the cloud. Takes another minute because we're actually on. Oh, there we go. It didn't take too long. So you got to see what it did to the background, and so it gives a kind of a softer bokeh. Let's see if there's a. So that's, and you can vary that. You can have it go on top of the original image. I had it as a separate image here, but it also can go on top of. So you can decrease that. But there's an awful lot of people now that are like, boy, I really like that. And it can be a way if you've got a very busy background, and that's a great example of it will auto select and generally does a really good job with foreground and background. You see the foreground's a little off, out of focus as well, a little soft. So it does that in a few seconds. And sometimes I'll have an image, I like to give it that treatment. It's kind of like, you've got all these tools at your availability, and you can decide if it's appropriate or not. If it's in the studio and there's a studio background or something, it doesn't really work because there's no distance, but doesn't really do much for any purpose. But outside, sometimes if you're looking for that longer lens, wider aperture look, and you didn't happen to use that, this can really create that look. And I've had some nice wall portraits go out of here with people that really enjoyed that whole isolated look. Some people feel like it looks a little too cut and pasted, but generally I feel like it's it's another tool that we can use. And again, if you look along here and along here, there's a million different ways to do things and a million different tools. And one of my biggest questions is somebody says, I want to learn to do Photoshop. I'm like, well, what do you want it to do? And that's where you start. What do I need? What are my needs from Photoshop? Because Photoshop can do quite a bit, but unless you tell it what to do, it's not going to do it for you, obviously. So in my case, the list is pretty simple, as far as a little like cropping or whatever, Go ahead.
All right. Andreas asks, on this, the background is blurred, isn't it? Oh, I think he might have been talking about the original. It's a little bit blurred, but you can see with that it added even a shallower depth of field overall. Even down at the bottom in the front area, you can see that it supplied depth of field there as well. Shallower. Yeah,
because generally when I photograph outside like this, I try to have it so that we have some shallower depth of field, and thus a wider aperture. But sometimes, depending on the lighting conditions, the time of day, or the lens, it's not as defined as that is. And I have students sometimes that come in, because this is pretty popular, especially with high school students, and families, some families. They're like, can you do that? And I'm like, sure. And so that if I take the photograph and it's just not possible to do with the condition that I'm dealing with, I can create that look, and they're like, wow, that's fantastic. We'll take it, So it is good to have that as, part of your arsenal that you deal with. Is it a crutch to replace, cleaning up the background or having good photographs? No, but it's kind of nice to be able to have that.
Excellent. All right. Well, that about brings us to the end here. So what I want to do is I want to pose to anyone on the event here live, our members, if you have any follow-up questions, now is your last call to get those questions in real quick. We've only got a few minutes left here today. Tom, great stuff today. Thank you so much for prepping so well for this and having some options of things up there to show people how to do. And for bringing your expertise here today. We really appreciate it. And while we're waiting to see if any, here we go. Andreas is asking, where are the webinars on the website? So on the online vault, you'll be able to find the recent things and the latest editions. Otherwise, any pre-recorded webinars and so forth will just be on there in the order they came in, that they were created. So you'll be able to scroll down and see everything on the online vault, but you can also search for any subject that you want and use keywords in the search tool, and that will help you find them. But this one will be added to the online vault at the top in the latest editions, and then it will just kind of drop down the page as we add other things on top of it. I hope that answers the question for you, Andreas. Shirley says, truly appreciate you, Tom. Thanks.
Thank you, Shirley.
Yeah, great stuff.
Yeah,
So
do
while
we,
we're waiting
Todd.
for any other questions, last minute questions to maybe come in, Dad, I'll turn it over to you just real quick for any wrap up, because we've only got 5 minutes left total, and Tom as well, and we'll see if any other questions come in last minute.
Well, the only point I want to make is that everything that goes out of your business has your signature on it, and you're building a reputation for your, let's say, business lifetime. And so you want to always be sure that everything is done to the very finest that you can humanly do. Even your least expensive color, if you have options, which we always recommend you have 2 or 3 levels of product line, even the least expensive one is done to the very finest of your human capability. And that's why Photoshop is so important. And that's why all the details and little things that Tom said today can be so helpful to you, because you want people to look at these and see how nice everybody looks, and you want your clients ranting and raving about how incredible you are to work with and what a beautiful job you did. So this is very important stuff to building your reputation in the community. So thank you, Tom.
My pleasure. You know, as we go through this, that's my emphasis, is that we want to have a well-rounded business. I want to be able to go out in the backyard as my daughter's covered up to her elbows. I thought I'd save this for last. This is not Photoshop. That's my daughter out in the snow, and she's quite tall. But anyway, is you want to be able to spend time with your family and friends and have a life outside of your photography business. And so in the same way that people mistakenly we say, well, I don't advertise, I don't market because it costs money. Well, it's not true. If you do it properly, it creates an income. The same way with Photoshop, and is that it should be just another tool, another small aspect of your business that enhances your business. But, and I know it's cool because I got sucked in big time, but the old saying that came up almost 20 years ago when I first, learned about Photoshop is just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And automation and aftermarket products have come in and really automated a lot of this. But I think it's nice to be able to go, okay, even automated, so many things I could do here. What do I want to bother with? And if it's an automated program, great, you can plug in or something like that. But you should understand basically what it's doing and why it's doing it, so that you can maybe go in and start that process yourself without investing in those. So I appreciate people being here. Great questions. And again, I scratched the surface, but it's awful good to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tom. And Linda says, thank you all. And Shirley says, have you guys thought of teaching how to put in keywords on the photos for Google to recognize? I think we talk about that a bit on our website design video. It doesn't take very long. It's a super simple thing to do, but that is a good idea, Shirley, and we can talk about that further in some future programs. But if you go to the Online Vault and search on it, that would be great. And Linda types in and says, I'd love a class on SEO, search engine optimization. So maybe we will talk about that a little bit more in the future. And what I would love to do is get somebody who is a massive expert in that area. We know our stuff pretty well, but I'd love to find somebody who, like, outside the photographic industry, especially, who's a real expert on especially Google and their algorithms to assist with that. But those are great ideas. And thank you for those notes, everyone. And Mitch, thank you for your great questions. And also, I just want to let Mitch know, I did get your email question as a coaching student, and I will be responding to that either later tonight or tomorrow for you for sure, the question that you sent me. I just wasn't able to get to it today because we were swamped bouncing from thing to thing. It's been a good, busy day, but thanks for getting that into me, Mitch. All right, with that, thank you, members, for being here today. We hope this was helpful to you. It was our honor to get to have Tom on here with us and to bring these wonderful key points to you. Thank you again, Tom, for taking the time and doing this with us today. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right, excellent. So again, just take action on what you discovered today. Utilize this as you go forward. Remember to keep doing things in camera as much as you can, and whatever you can't, you can fix it in post, and you can do it quickly by using the key things we talked about today. Keep coming back to the Online Vault on a regular basis, looking for new videos, audio programs, upcoming live events, all that stuff that we're adding to that program. And we will talk to you again on the next program. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.